Hi guys, doing something a little bit different here today. Now, I'm a guy with a full-time job, but also a full-time love of music, and unfortunately for me, only one of those things pays for my mortgage, and tragically, it isn't the love of music. Yet. As a result, I simply don't have enough hours in the day to be able to do a full-bodied review of everything I listen to. It just isn't possible. But I also don't want some of these albums to slip by me without giving them at least a little bit of attention, right? Now, don't think for a second that these are B-grade albums or records that are subpar. If anything, this couldn't be further from the truth with most of these. I simply delegate myself time to review in full those records that I feel I have more to say about. At times an album can hit me incredibly hard, but I simply find it either difficult to talk about it or I simply don't have much to say beyond record good me likey. To that end, I've curated a list of 10 albums from the first quarter of 2024 that I think absolutely rock, but I just didn't have the time to get around to reviewing them in full. Everything in this list is worth your time, so I'll take around a minute or two with each of these to tell you what I liked about it and why I think it's worth listening to. So, without further ado, let's get started. If you ever wished that Wilderun was more like Dream Theater than Opeth, then boy do I have an album for you. This very much subscribes to the classic progressive metal playbook, but it manages to keep things a bit more interesting though by incorporating a lot of these folkier, more traditional instrumental passages and flavours, and it makes for an album that feels right at home for anyone who was raised on a diet of Aerion, of Dream Theater, of Fate's Warning, etc, etc, but with the addition of a kind of Tiresias, Blind Guardian or Enisferum accenting to keep things interesting. Now I'm not going to lie, it does feel a tad on the overlong side of things, coming in at a beefy 70 minutes, with quite a few tracks on here not really justifying their length. Pagan Spirit comes to mind, repeating itself perhaps once too often, a symptom that kind of runs throughout the album, but it's still a pretty great time. It's accessible and easy to listen to. I just feel that it can be a little flabby and bloated in places and would have benefited greatly from some cutting room floor action. I mean, don't get me wrong, it still absolutely rocks and it's still worth exploring these folksy vibes. Man, trying to categorise this album has driven me to near madness. Glass Beach have really given us an album that arguably has a little bit of an identity crisis. It's incredibly varied, almost to a fault, and to the point where it's almost hard to tell who or what kind of person is likely to gravitate towards this. That being said though, the sounds on Plastic Death are extremely appealing, and it's hard to know what's coming next, which honestly is half the fun. One minute you're dealing with Pablo Honey era Radiohead, and the next you're under attack from avant-garde brutality and ferocious instrumentation, the likes of which will make Black Midi blush. The record feels like a work of art though. It's incredibly dense, full of twists and turns and unexpected hooks, and while it's not an easy listen or a straightforward recommendation, if you like music that challenges you and makes you think outside of the box, then it's hard to think of anything that really succeeds better at this than Plastic Death. On the other end of the spectrum though, we've got the latest from veteran UK act Judas Priest, which provides everything you're probably expecting. There's not a lot I can really say here that every other online music reviewer hasn't already said about Invincible Shield, but it's nice to see that a band that's been around for 5 decades of music is still capable of bringing out something as breezy and enjoyable as this. Priest really came back into focus with their album prior to this, Firepower, and I was about ready to write that off as a fluke of success. But Invincible Shield is here to prove that even when Rob Halford is well into his 70s, he's more than capable of belting out some astonishingly powerful and memorable lines. Now there's nothing on this album that will surprise you, this is classic Judas Priest. But the fact that I'm describing this as classic Priest should give you an indication of the overall quality of the record. It's loud, it's heavy, it's aggressive, and it is an enormous amount of fun. If every band of this considerable legacy was able to put out albums of this quality this deep into their career, then we would truly be living in the most blessed of timelines. And while I'm sure that Judas Priest may not have much gas left in the tank, this final stomp on the accelerator really does go to show how lucky we are as fans. Anyone who knows me well enough will know that I love a good pop album. Elton John, Lady Gaga, ABBA, Florence and the Machine. When it's done well, pop music is absolutely fantastic, and people need to be less afraid of it as a descriptor. The Last Dinner Party is some of the best genuine pop music I've heard in the 2020s, and shows some real promise for what is coming out of the more mainstream parts of the music industry. Now, I know there's been some controversy that the band was pieced together by industry executives, but you can either get hung up on conspiracy theories or you can enjoy some of the most creative, interesting and well-crafted pop music that's come out this decade. This is the sort of music I want to point people towards when they say that modern music is creatively bankrupt and lacks any kind of heart or soul. The Last Dinner Party is a phenomenally well put together troupe, and Prelude to Ecstasy represents an incredibly promising start for this young gathering of next big things. The instrumentation is killer, the arrangement's catchy and enjoyable, the vocals powerful and mesmerising. Modern pop really doesn't get much better than this, and you'd be mad to pass this one by. If you guessed that this band was heavily influenced by Pink Floyd based on the album name alone, guess what? You'd be absolutely right, you clever little thing. Monkey 3 are so much more than just a glorified Pink Floyd cover band though, and while the influence is clear as day in some parts, with some of the sounds coming out of this record feeling a little bit close to the bone, they more than prove their individual merits over the course of this 5-track masterpiece. Now, I adore this album. Of all the records in this roundup, I think this is the one I keep coming back to the most. Purely instrumental from start to finish, the band has done an amazing job of crafting music with texture and personality that oozes a kind of slick professionalism that most bands could only dream of. Like the best kind of psychedelic instrumental bands, Monkey 3's Welcome to the Machine manages to make you forget about the passage of time, and it's extraordinary how quickly this album flows by. There's so many little moments on this that warm the cockles of my heart, but it's when it's at its most gentle and patient, with the band expanding out on every note with real panache, that I find myself the most enraptured by their sound. Easily one of the strongest instrumental albums of the year so far, this is not to be missed and is an amazing release for anyone who's a fan of the more spacey, tripped out and long-form kind of prog rock from the 1970s. I never know if I want to pronounce this band as Myrath or Mirath. I don't know, so I'm going to go with whatever sounds right at the time, which at this very moment would be Myrath. These guys kick ass. Seriously, if you're looking for glorious, heroic-sounding, chest-pumping, head-nodding metal, then you really can't do much better than these guys. Karma is the 6th full-length album from these Tunisian power metal proggers, but this album definitely falls less on the prog side of things and falls much more in line with the power metal shade of the spectrum. If you jam things like Seventh Wonder, Edguy, Camelot, Orphaned Land, etc., then I have a feeling you're going to have an incredible time with this album. Myrath have mastered the art of the chorus here, and you'll find yourself wanting to belt out every single one of these songs on a drunken karaoke night. There's something they've captured on this album that's so incredibly addictive, so powerful and joy-inducing. It's impossible to feel upset or glum when you're listening to Karma. Absolutely one of the most triumphant sounding releases of the year. This is a must for anyone who likes their metal uplifting, brash and totally in your face. Now this one came to my attention from fellow music aficionado Matt O'Leary, and his enthusiastic review for this one definitely piqued my curiosity, and I'm super grateful that I decided to check this one out based off the strength of his review. There's a softness to this album that's warming and inviting. The tone is very clean, very purposeful and engaging, and the opening track of Is That You really sets the scene nicely for what you can expect from this album. It's a kind of gentle, jazzy, patient record. Plantoid are happy to take their time in expressing themselves here, but they also never amble aimlessly. The airy vocal arrangements are honestly absolutely wonderful and really add a lot to the atmospherics and mood of the album. There's a certain feeling of, retro-futurism to the production and style of the album that is super appealing to me, feeling equal parts respectful of prog rock's past whilst also paving the way towards the future of the genre. It's an incredible blend of psychedelic instrumental passages and sweet, soulful, beautiful vocals that drift in and out of consciousness. This is one of the year's strongest debut albums easily, and not one to be missed by any fan of the genre. Even now, as we move into the spring, this album, so mired in the bleak dark of a Scottish Highlands winter, remains as engaging and as captivating as when I first heard it back in January. The record is the output of solo artist Tony Dunn, and it's an absolute breath of fresh air. There's a crisp, dark melancholy to this album that I am absolutely in love with. This record captures a sense of bleak hope, a tangible portrayal of sunshine playing on the morning mist of a bitterly cold winter morning. The album is big, it's long form, and happy to take its time with the ideas contained within. The riffs are epic in scope, the vocals are unique and haunting, and the entire scale of the album is one of gigantic proportions that begs to be heard on the loudest speakers you dare. This album is one of those that's really risen in my estimations with each and every subsequent listen I've given it. Each time I explore its murky depths and snow-capped peaks, I feel like I'm finding something new, something I missed the previous time, and it keeps rewarding my curiosity time and time again. Tony Dunn deserves every bit of your time and attention. Traverse the Bealach is a simply stunning album that stands toe-to-toe with the best of the likes from Solstafir, Alcest and Catatonia. It's bleak but endlessly beautiful, and you need to give it a try for yourself. Ooh, talk about bringing it back and making yourself relevant again. For the longest time I had written off Sonata Arctica as having fallen off the edge and into the void of spiralling mediocrity. 2019's Talvio was basically awful, with 2016's The Ninth Hour only marginally better, and the less said of 2012's Stones Grow Her Name, the better. But I once truly loved this band. The run of Eclectica to Silence to Winterheart's Guild to Reckoning Night is amongst the best 4-album runs of any power metal band ever, and it's those albums that made me such a fan of the band in my university days. So imagine my shock when I heard that Clear Cold Beyond was actually pretty good. I felt like Anton Ego in Pixar's Ratatouille when his subordinate informed him that Chef Gusteau's restaurant is popular again. But I can't deny it. This album is actually a lot of fun. I enjoyed listening to this one way more than I ever thought I would do. And honestly, it's just nice to hear this band that I once loved and sang the praises of, putting out their best material in 20 years. Whilst I wouldn't say this is anywhere near as good as that initial quartet of albums, no. Clear Cold Beyond is still an enormously enjoyable slice of classic power metal fun. This won't make you a fan of the band if you never cared for them, but if you're like me, God help you, and have been pining for the Sonata Arctica you used to love, then don't skip this. It's a genuinely refreshing taste of the band they used to be and should not be missed. Now there's one thing that modern progressive metal certainly isn't lacking in, is albums that are really, really long. And this debut from Triton Project is no exception to this. Coming in at a hefty 77 minutes, it may not be the longest album I've ever listened to, no. But this one is 77 minutes across only 5 tracks and closes off with a 20-minute epic, immediately followed by a 28-minute one. So yeah, this is beefy with a capital heifer. Now this may or may not be super appealing to you, but it's certainly got my attention, mostly as I was really hoping that this behemoth-sized and epic-heavy structuring was going to be justified. And you know what? It nearly is. There's a lot going on here to enjoy. Heck, I'll even go on and say that there's parts of Messenger's Quest that I genuinely love. It's complex, ambitious, and sprawling in its narrative scope and scale, fitting nicely into that kind of Seventh Wonder, Symphony X niche, with some of the coolest keyboard work I've heard in years. But I do feel that the pacing and the structure of the album does let it down somewhat. It's a dense album, somewhat detrimentally so in places. You can't just hop in and out of this album. It's a full-time commitment with each play. And while it can be exhausting in places with so many ideas and flourishes going off all at once, it's still an immensely enjoyable titan of a record. If you like your prog metal unfiltered and maximalist, you'll have an amazing time with Messenger's Quest. Just don't be afraid to split your listen up into chunks, or you might get a bit exhausted before it ends. So, there we have it. 10 albums from the first quarter of 2024 that are absolutely worth your time. I've listened to a lot more than just these 10 albums, of course. I could have easily included Mountain Callers Chronicle 2 Hypergenesis, Cave Sermons Divine Laughter, Hulda's Verses in Oath, Eternal Storms A Giant Bound to Fall, Job for a Cowboy's Moon Healer, Borknagar's Fall, Vicinity's 8. The list honestly just keeps on going, but I wanted to keep this to a reasonably brief 10 albums. Now I'm very excited for what quarter 2 will bring, and I will of course be endeavouring to bring you my thoughts on the best of prog rock and metal as we segue into the spring. 2024's been off to a cracking start, and I can't wait to see what surprises the rest of the year will have. Now I just want to thank you all very much for watching if you made it this far. If you did like this video, please do give it a thumbs up. Please do share it around with anyone else who you think would possibly enjoy it. And as always guys, please do consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this. And until next time guys, as always, keep your rhyme signatures pretty dang odd.